Hi guys, so it's me again. I'm just going to look today at a book that I had for my degree course, which was all about communication and interpersonal skills. So this is a book that's by Erica Pavord and Elaine Donnelly, and I use this in my health and social care degree course throughout. Because it's just so useful and it's so relevant to all the modules I was studying. Obviously, being able to communicate and having interpersonal skills is absolutely essential for all sort of work in any kind of health or social care related job, and for many others as well. It's a very highly transferable skill that most employers want these days. So I'm just going to look, and I'm just going to take a few notes as well, just because it's kind of a refresher for me as well. So I'm just going to do a little bit of note taking. I hope that's okay. Okay, so this is just the first part of this, is called Introducing Key Concepts in Communication. And there's some key themes here, which is the importance of communication, moving towards a definition of communication, which I feel is very difficult, just because there's so much to it. It's so complex as a subject, especially in this day and age as well, when we communicate in so many different ways. There's academic definitions, which is obviously important for when you're doing your work, for completing assignments, etc. And there's communication theory as well, so that's obviously very important as well. And obviously the models of communication, which are really important to know. So it starts off here by saying that being able to communicate effectively is essential for any practitioner working with people. I think that's a given, really, isn't it? And that it's central to providing good care and service. That's why it's very central to any training, any courses that you'll do in relation to health and social care. This book aims to launch you on an exploration of what it is to communicate effectively with others, and the impact that good and bad communication has on the process of care. And I think on people's self-esteem generally, isn't it? If we're bad communicators, it just gives the wrong message to people, and it can have such an effect on people. So it's no wonder it's central to all health social care training. So the importance of good communication then. There's a quote here from NHS employers from 2014, and it says that communication underpins all else we do. Effective communication is a two-way process which develops and cements relationships, keeps people informed, and reduces the likelihood of errors and mistakes, which is just so important, isn't it? There's another quote here from the Children's Workforce Development Council from 2010, and they say that good communication is central to working with children, young people, families and carers. It helps to build trust and encourage them to seek advice and use services. It's a key to establishing and maintaining relationships, and is an active process that involves listening, questioning, understanding and responding. So important. So communication is central to everything we do in health and social care. Effective communication is the key to delivering high quality help and care, regardless of your field or the setting you work in. If any of us communication skills are poor or deficient, or if we are negligent in communicating something that's important, the people we aim to care for will be disadvantaged and may suffer in consequence. Constantly reviewing, maintaining and improving your communication skills is a very important part of your work, not just as a student but as a professional. So I'm just going to make a little note of that. So it's reviewing and maintaining and improving. I think it's a really important point to make, isn't it? So good communication is not always easy, and it's just as important for you to know a little about the basics of good communication to aid your reflections and study of how to improve your communication and your interpersonal skills. Effective communication is recognised as a core component for all people who work in public service. The failings in care at the Mid Staffordshire NHS Foundation Trust were documented in the Francis Report in 2013, which highlighted the need for patient-centred and compassionate service for patients. It stated that nursing staff should be recruited in line with the core values and behaviours termed the 6 C's. So I'm just going to make a note of the 6 C's and we'll go through that in a minute. These values and behaviours are not new, but are put together to reflect the values and beliefs that underpin care wherever it takes place. So the first C we have here is care. Okay? So it says that all nurses, midwives and care staff commit to looking after patients with care. Sounds simple, but often it's overlooked. So, it is the fundamental thing of what we do. The next one is compassion, which again sounds obvious, but isn't always obvious. After a long day, a long shift, compassion can wear thin sometimes, difficult people, but it says here that it's a pledge to deliver care with compassion, empathy, kindness, trust, respect and dignity. And I think at the forefront of that we have to remember that we're professionals and we are paid, and we have to understand that people come to us with difficulties. People aren't looking for support because they're having a good day. Generally there's difficulties, there's issues, and I think to constantly empathise and to constantly have that in the back of your mind is very, very useful. So the next one it says is competence. I'll just make a note. Competence. So there is an assurance that this care will be delivered by competent nurses, midwives and care staff who have the relevant knowledge, skills and education, and who receive ongoing training and support. Very much down to the organisation, I think, there as well, to ensure that takes place. So the next one is our communication. All promise that there will be improved communication with patients as partners in their care, recognising that communication at a time of vulnerability will always be remembered. The next one is courage. All promise that care will be delivered with the courage to speak up when things are wrong, to spread good practice, to challenge, to say stop, and to place the interests of others before one's own. And the last one is commitment. All staff will make a commitment to work as a team and to make this care happen for every patient, all day, every day. And those definitions come from the NHS and were written in 2013. So communication is at the foundation of each of the 6 C's, enabling health and social care workers to demonstrate care and compassion, listening to those we care for and to our colleagues, and speaking up when we feel the need to. It is at the heart of effective teamwork, ensuring that everyone works together to provide the best care possible. So then we move on towards this definition of communication, which, like I said, I find quite difficult, and there may be many different definitions, and you may agree with some and disagree with others. So this says that there are numerous definitions of communication in the Oxford English Dictionary. So where should we begin? Before pinning it down to specific definitions, let's begin by looking at what we understand within the broader context of communication to be. So here there's some ideas about jotting down what communication means to you and trying to find your own definition, which is quite a good exercise to do. So here it says my definition of communication. My initial list of what the term communication means was very long, as would probably yours be. It is what this whole book is about, but when I came to determine my own definition, my thoughts immediately focused on the notion that communication is about interaction we have with others. This seemed nice and simple on the surface, but as I started to tease the definition out, I found several issues that needed to be worked through. The use of the word any creates difficulty for me in exploring what I want to focus on, and the use of the word others overcomplicates things too. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? So they're saying that we want to pin this down a little bit in the more professional capacity, I suppose, because it says here that others could be animals or other living things. I have been known to share my innermost thoughts with my cat. Thank goodness he cannot repeat those to other people. And I've been seen talking to plants and vegetables in the garden. At the time of writing, I'm talking to my computer. Not that it ever responds. Perhaps that is the key. I decided to keep my definition simple, and in the context of this book, I define it to be any interaction that takes place between people. Even though I have tried to keep my definition simple, it's still very complicated. Our interactions don't just take place face to face. They take place on many different levels, and we use a variety of different methods and many modes of delivery in getting our message across. So, the rider to my definition is that communication is a very difficult term to pin down to one simple statement. When studying definitions of communication, it is important to remember that definitions reflect the interest and background of the person making the definition, and may also reflect their perception and experiences. So therefore, their definition is not necessarily true in every context. I'm just going to have a little drink, bear with me. So, how do we communicate? So my next thoughts turn to the question of how we communicate. I have no doubt that you have considered this in your response to the writing activity. Communication can be anything from a personal text message from a friend to a public advertisement on the side of a bus. It might be as simple as a smile, or something as technically complicated as a piece of software for a computer. Thinking about methods and modes and channels of communication is an important aspect of understanding what we mean by communication, and this is explored further later in this chapter. When we come to study communication, it quickly becomes clear just how complex a phenomenon, it's a mouthful, it is, even though we all engage in it from the minute we are conceived. On a personal level, we communicate with the world around us by the things that we say, the way we say them, and the things that we do and the way we do them. It can be the clothes we wear, how we style our hair, the way we walk, the way we talk, the way we behave, and how we demonstrate our attitude to life. Communication is all of these things and more. Communication, values and well-being. Communication affects the way we feel about ourselves, as well as the way we feel about others. According to Littlejohn and Foss in 2005, how we communicate is associated with our personal values and with our culture and how we value others as well as ourselves. We live in a multicultural society, and we cannot just consider how we communicate. meaning ourselves within our own cultural group. We must consider others and how they communicate too. The NHS Knowledge and Skills Framework that you read earlier, we didn't read it, but makes it clear that communication is very closely linked with equality and diversity. The common core of skills and knowledge for the children's workforce also makes it clear that communication is closely linked with ethical practice and respect for ourselves. So I'm just going to make a note of that. Communication is linked to equality and diversity. It's amazing how it connects to so many aspects, really, isn't it? Really. Psychologists study communication and have argued that at every age and stage of our lives, communication is fundamental to our very being. We all have different levels at which we feel comfortable communicating, but we all need to do so to keep us well and functioning. According to Bowlby in 1969 and Crowley and Hunter in 2005, in situations where human beings are isolated and consequently forced into non-communication, their mental and physical health deteriorate. In tiny babies, non-communication can lead to very severe consequences and can even be life-threatening. And that was what Bowlby discovered in 1969. Interesting study that. If you ever get a chance to read about Bowlby, have a read. Very interesting. I am confident that, as I'm just going to make a note actually of Bowlby again and have a little look at his research, 1969. I am confident that as a result of the writing activity above, you are now aware of just how big a subject communication is, and as our main focus is interpersonal skills and communicating with others, perhaps you are now able to summarise this discussion, and as a result would like to review your own definition before moving on to look at the definition of others. So this now talks about definitions in academic study. In academic study, it is always more useful to explore subject-specific definitions, or at least definitions written by scholars within a particular discipline. Take the following definition, for example. Wood 2004 defines communication as a process in which individuals interact with and through symbols to create and interpret meaning. On the surface, this could be viewed simply as a collection of words, but there are many levels on which you can explore this definition. Let us look at those words and how Wood explains her perceptions and understanding of what communication is. The definition uses the word process, which is commonly understood to be a series of actions or activities that produce something. The word individuals suggests not just communicating with oneself, but also with others. So communication, according to this definition, is about taking part or sharing actions with another person or with a group of people. I'm going to make a note of Wood 2004, because I don't think I've looked at that definition or that kind of work yet. So this is about symbols. Wood suggests that we use symbols in our communication with ourselves and with others, and that we create and interpret meaning through those symbols. This throws another interesting perspective into the definition. Symbols are things that represent something else. They can be in the form of a material object, such as your country's national flag, or they could be in the form of a symbolic action, such as a gesture. Alongside this idea, we need to put the notion that we then create and interpret meanings from such symbolism, either through a shared activity or via our own internal understanding. That seems relatively simple, but the creation and interpretation of symbols can present us with all sorts of difficulty because symbols can be interpreted differently by different people, and their use in communication can be a little precarious. And then there's a reflective activity there that I'm not going to read too much. It says here that I'm sure you're able to think of many circumstances where symbols influence your behaviour. Road traffic signals are a good example of how a symbol can influence our behaviour. The speed camera sign always makes me check my speed, and traffic signage uses symbols to convey a whole host of messages targeted at influencing our driving behaviour. Symbols can create unity, and symbols can create tension. Symbolic acts have started wars, sparked revolution, and changed lives. And whether those changes were good or bad is down to your interpretation of them. Interesting way to look at it, isn't it? Just going to have a quick drink, bear with me. The definition offered by Wood raises some essential issues in studying communication that I was not able to raise in my definition earlier. It's important that we stop and make the time to explore definitions and try to see the world as others perceive it to be. It will enrich our understanding and enable us to make more positive decisions about how we communicate. Communication is about who we are. It isn't a single one-off thing. It is a very complicated process, and to assist you in understanding some of the complexities involved in communicating with yourself and with others, it has been broken down into different areas of studies. We have modes of communication. Messages are communicated in many different ways. New methods of transmission and new channels of communication are developing at an incredibly rapid pace as we progress into the digital age. Over the last 50 years, the developments in technology have had a massive impact on how we communicate with each other. We can contact online with someone on the other side of the world in an instant, and with someone in space at the flick of a switch. Since the publication of the first edition of this book, smartphones have further revolutionised the way we connect with others. Information technology has changed the world we live in more than any other technical phenomenon. When studying in any field of health and social care, you will find that ICT plays a vital role in how we deliver, record, and monitor care. As practitioners in whatever field you work in, you have a responsibility to develop and update your skills accordingly. So I think we now call it IT, don't we? And it's certainly changed how I work in the last few years. I think without it now we'd be lost, really. So it's highly essential. Just going to make a note. Okay. If you have the opportunity to speak with a person aged 80 years plus and see if they confirm the ways you've identified, they may be able to add to your list with some interesting examples of means of communication. So I think the writing activity was designed for you to write down methods of communication that you can think of. So it says no doubt some of their methods were quite innovative, particularly if they involved speaking with boyfriends and girlfriends without their parents being aware, and of course communicating during the war years. Perhaps your list will include some of the following: face-to-face, person-to-person conversation, whistling, singing and calling out loud, telephone, via the operator of course, writing including letters, postcards, poetry and song, handwritten records and ledgers and typed correspondence, telegraphy, telegrams and couriers, sign language and tic-tac and secret gestures, secret codes and messaging banners, flags and semaphore, flickering lights and opening and shutting curtains, pigeon post and go-betweens, flares and other pyrotechnics, radio, television and cinema. I think they sound quite fun ways of communicating actually. I think we've lost a lot of those, haven't we? Now we just pick up our phone and do everything, don't we? So we've almost lost the art of some of those ways of communicating, haven't we? Which is a real shame. These are only the examples we could come up with, but no doubt there are many more. So now it's asking you to write a list of methods of communication that people today use, that people see or take part in. So here there's laptops, tablets, computers, text messaging, emails, social media like Facebook, Twitter and Tumblr, telephone, mobile, smartphones, blogs and podcasts, YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram. It says KIK and GIFBoom, but I think they are all quite old, and I think KIK no longer exists, so it shows how old this book is. It shows how quickly the technology is moving as well, doesn't it? Satellite communication such as GPS and sat-nav, electronic records, online forms, care documentation and care plans, voicemail, pages, beeps and alarms, radio waves, x-rays and scans. And it says this is by no means a comprehensive list. In fact, now, if you think about it, it's probably even longer, isn't it? I think we have even more different ways now. Ways that are probably beyond me, but my kids probably use it now. We're sure you can think of others. Yes, just ask the teenagers of today. Especially if you are if you're information technology natives. Channels of communication are developing all the time, and this requires us to be engaged in learning and developing our skills in communication throughout our lives, which can be quite difficult if you are caring for people of a certain age who perhaps just don't want to engage in a lot of these methods of communication. If you think about the way that we now communicate our doctor's appointments, it can be quite isolating for somebody who doesn't know how to use this technology or has no interest in using this technology. So in a way it's almost slightly discriminating against people that don't use it, so we have to be aware of these things as well, I think, especially as people are getting older, and we have to adapt how we treat people, and it's a shame really that sometimes these things aren't as inclusive as we like to think they are. So it says here about choosing your approach when communicating with others. When communicating directly with people, you first need to choose the mode or the approach that you're going to use, and to be effective in getting your message across, you need to consider some key issues. So there's another little activity there which I'm not going to look at. It says here, when communicating with people in the workplace, it's important that we think carefully about the channel of communication we use, so that we can make sure we pick the most effective method for them. People are individuals, and what is satisfactory for one may be completely inappropriate for another. If you're working with families, you may use several channels of communication and to target individual members. A leaflet and a quick explanation may suffice in some circumstances, but in others we need to employ a wide range of interpersonal and communication skills to ensure that what we do is effective for everyone concerned. Studying communication theory. Studying communications theory can help us to understand how communication works and to determine the most effective communication channel to use. Knowing how communication works we can then understand how, why, and where communication goes wrong. When communication goes wrong in health and social care settings, the consequences can be far-reaching. People and families can be misjudged, errors in decision-making can be made, and care may be seriously compromised, leaving you and the people you care for at risk. There's a risk of harm there, isn't there? Which is very important, I think, when we're thinking about communication. If we can identify how communication takes place and understand its process, we can develop strategies to ensure that communication is effective and meets the needs of all concerned. To help you understand communication, we are first going to look at the key frameworks within which the theories and models of communication are set. Frameworks of communication. There are 4 main frameworks for theories of communication. These are mechanistic. Just going to make a note of that. Definitely don't think I studied this at university. So this framework was originally used by people working on radio and telephone communications and incorporates a transmission model of communication. So then we have psychological. So this framework concentrates far more on how we feel during a communication and our emotional responses. Then we have social constructionist. This framework is concerned with how we all construct different realities from the same experiences. The symbolic interaction theory that we will be looking at is included in this framework. Then we have systematic. This framework concentrates on the way that communication is part of a whole system and how, within that system, each part of the communication is repeatedly re-examined and reworked. We're going to look at 2 models of communication within these frameworks. The first is a transition model. This type of model is included in the mechanistic framework and is said to be linear in its process. It's a simple, straightforward model that's easy to understand and can be very useful in helping analyse communication processes between people and organisations. The second model we will look at is a transactional model that combines principles from the psychological, social constructionist, and systematic frameworks. Systemic framework, The transactional model is more complicated than the mechanistic one and further explores the experience of shared meanings in our communications with others that we discussed earlier. We will then follow an example of a transactional model in practice by exploring the psychotherapeutic theory of transactional analysis in Chapter 4. So it now talks about the Shannon and Weaver transition model, which it says is one of the earliest and most basic and well-known communication models. And it's from 1949, so it shows how old it is. It says that it's often referred to as the mother of communication models, and it provides a really good starting point of anybody studying communication theory. And there's a figure here. Okay, I'm just going to try and show you that. Okay. And it says that the arrows show the transmission from the information source to the destination point in only one direction. So it gives the belief that messages flow in one direction and is a linear process, which probably in real life it's not linear at all, is it? But it's a very basic, that's why it's basic, I guess. So it says that the model consists of 5 parts and what they term to be noise. So in face-to-face communication, the information part is the idea that you have in your head. The transmitter is you sending the message. The channel is the voice that you speak the idea with, and the receiver is the ear of the person to whom you're talking. The destination would be the intended person's head. So noise, as you can see, occurs at any point within that communication process and can prevent the original thought or idea reaching its destination intact and as intended. So noise can be anything. It might be a physical, loud sound. It might be psychological, so an emotion such as anxiety, or a strongly held point of view or a cultural barrier. It might be semantic, so it's a language or representation problem. It might be physiological, so there might be deafness, blindness or pain. This can interrupt communication at any stage. So there's a little bit of a reflection there which you can work through as well, which when I was studying, I found it really useful just to get the idea in my head, just to get sort of it, so practically, so you could see it working practically. So then it says, if your message is not getting across, this simple model gives you an opportunity to explore some of the reasons why. So you have to identify the noise, so then you could then try to eliminate it or modify it in some way. Possibilities are all subject to the nature of the noise. It may require you to do some strategic thinking and extra planning to ensure that your message is getting across. So it says, can you think of any recent examples of noise interfering with the message you want to convey? And if you work in health and social care, I'm sure there's plenty of times that's happened. And in chapters 2 and 6, it says, I'll look at noise again by thinking about blocks and barriers to communication and exploring ways of overcoming this. So it says, as teachers, we experience noise in the learning situation all the time, particularly in large groups. They often hear colleagues say, I told the students something yesterday, why don't they listen? Our response is always the same. Telling someone doesn't mean they've heard what you said. And using Shannon Weaver's model, our approach is to identify the noise that stopped that message getting across and understood. Other methods to overcome noise in this example often involve using alternative models, modes, channels of communication, including announcements, using humour to capture attention, always a good one, using IT, using other people, using good old repeating yourself, using humour to capture attention, I've already said that one, bear with me, jumping up and down, or even whispering. These are all strategies that people use in the classroom. The strategies you use should be appropriate to the situation and to the people or person that you're communicating with. And never believe that people have understood and heard what you said without checking first and making sure this message has reached its destination intact and as you intended. Using such a simple strategy will help to avoid all sorts of complications later on. So we've also then got Julia Wood's transactional model, and it says here that it was developed by Julia Wood in 2004, and earlier in the chapter explored her definition of communication, which you might recall is a systematic process in which individuals interact with and through symbols to create and interpret meaning. That definition was then broken down into components for analysis, and part of this discussion explored the significance of symbols in our communication and how they impact upon our behaviour and how we create and interpret meanings through that process. So I'm just going to go on to the diagram now of the model. Hopefully you can see that okay. There's lots of arrows going in all sorts of different directions there. Okay. So I'm just going to go back. So the model has a communicator A that is transmitting a message responds to communicator A. Notice that the noise surrounds the process, and shared messages have a direct impact on the communication between the two. So it's far more complex than Shannon and Weaver's model, which was linear in its process. In this model, messages are being sent backwards and forwards all the time, not just in one direction, but simultaneously. The transactional model focuses on how we interpret meaning and how meanings that are shared within our communication and with other people. So it's very much more realistic, isn't it? So when communication goes wrong, it's often the result of meaning being misinterpreted. Meaning in communication is said to be negotiated between the people concerned. For example, if you use a word in one context with friends, it will be interpreted in a particular way by that social group, but use the same word or communication with your teachers or parents, and the meaning is not shared on the same level. For example, the word sick, which my teenagers use a lot, and it means something entirely different to me, so it's like a foreign language really, because I'm just that old, as they like to tell me. So whatever and random come to mind. As we know, older people's interpretation of these words are completely different from those of younger people. There are no doubt lots of other examples that you can think of. I certainly can, having teenagers. So our language is constantly developing, and it has to accommodate new ways of learning, of living, new technologies, ways of expressing thoughts and feelings. Social groups often use common language to communicate on a psychological and sociological level, and it isn't always apparent to people on the outside of that group, is it? I'm sure you have your own little in-jokes and things that other people just don't get. The language we use, our non-verbal behaviours and symbols we include in our communication all play a powerful role in establishing and sharing the meanings. It's important to remember that understanding something is a subjective experience. We construct meaning in social contexts and share a mutual awareness and often a mutual language that is culturally bound and age bound. The transactional model is a more accurate model of what really happens in face-to-face communication than the Shannon and Weaver model. The transactional model takes into consideration all the aspects of communication that we looked at earlier in this chapter. It's also a better basis for any new communication system that you might consider creating to help the people that you work with. What is it in the transactional model that makes it so much better at explaining what real life communication is like? The answer lies in the channels of communication. And for example, these are your facial expressions, your body angle, your posture, your presentation, your tone of voice, the words you use, the word images, and the role portrayal. And if we refer back to the diagram we looked at, you'll see that it's not only multiple channels being used, but the arrows are pointing both ways instead of in just one way. So the person sending the messages at the same time, receiving a message, and they're simultaneously decoding it. They're using all of their previous experience and memories to sift through what they are receiving in order to give meaning to it. At the same time, they're creating and sending their own message, and there is still that noise going on around the communication being sent, received, and decoded. So it's not a simple process at all. There are a number of channels that we use to communicate with others. These channels or methods tend to correspond to particular senses, such as sight and hearing. And for each channel we use, there is a method or way that facilitates its use best. We all communicate in different forms, and the methods available for us to communicate are always increasing increasing as information and communication technology develops, providing us with the opportunity to use multiple channels of communication to get our message across. All the channels or methods have different advantages and disadvantages. When choosing a way to communicate, some of the aspects that you need to take into consideration are how much time is available, how many people you're communicating with, whether you want people to reply to you, whether you want people to ask you questions, how much information you want to get from them, how much information you want to give to them, how many senses you need them to use for the message to be understood. The way we choose to communicate with people depends on the channels of communication open to us. In a normal situation, you don't notice yourself deciding on the considerations above when you communicate with someone. However, as someone working in a caring capacity in health and social care fields, you do need to think more carefully about the best ways to communicate. You need to take into account their needs, not just yours, and balance those needs against the needs of the organisation you work in. The message here is that once you start to unpick a communication and begin analysing the process, you can start to appreciate the depth of meaning that lies behind the words and actions that you engage in. Even if you try not to interact with someone, by hiding in the sluice or in an office, or simply staring out of a window, you're communicating that you do not wish to interact with them. We communicate with all of our senses, our sight, our hearing, our smell and touch. In fact, we cannot not communicate. In order to ensure that what we are communicating is appropriate, we need to be more consciously aware of the impact we have